Good evening and welcome to Normal Island Live. My name is Curtis Daly and I will be your host this evening. I'm joined by the brilliant Sinan Kose, aka SK the Crusader. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. But let's get onto the stories of the night. Now, Reform have dropped their manifesto called Our Contract. The main theme of it includes tax cuts and slashing wasteful spending. Now, we're going to do a deep dive in their main policies. Slash government waste. Government spending needs major reform. Everyone has to watch what they spend and make savings. So should the government. After all, they are spending our money, not theirs. We must change course urgently, or Britain will go bust. Reform UK would make sure your hard-earned cash is treated with care and respect. Save £5 in every £100. We make these savings in business and at home. The public sector must be no exception. Every manager across government must find savings without touching frontline services. We should slash wasteful spending, cut bureaucracy and negotiate better value procurement across every department. This will enable lower taxes, more money in your pockets and boost our economy. This saves £50 billion per year. Brexit bonus. Cut unnecessary regulations. Government red tape and nanny state regulations are estimated to have cost the UK economy £143 billion since 2015. That means billions of pounds lost in growth and taxes. Cut foreign aid by 50%. Save £6 billion from the £12.8 billion budget. British taxpayers should not be funding countries like China or India who have their own space programs. We can do much more good by spending less with better targeting. A major review is needed into the effectiveness of overseas aid. The economic illiteracy here is alarming. I mean, first, they want to try and compare household budgets with macroeconomic government spending. I mean, you can save money in your personal finances by reducing your spending. But at a state level, spending is what keeps society going. Services need to be funded, which includes health, transport. These things are essential to keep the economy going. We've had 14 years of austerity. The last thing we want to do is to cut and slash government budgets. Now, Reform thinks this will save £91 billion per year. I mean, there's no detail on how that's going to be the case. They just say independent economists, which is essentially, trust me, bro. Now, cutting red tape, I mean, we hear from many politicians and political parties. It's basically a euphemism for cutting regulations, and some regulations are important, such as workers' rights and safety. Now, let's take a look at their economic policy. Make work pay. Lift the income tax start point to £20,000 per year. This frees up 7 million people from paying income tax and saves every worker almost £1,500 per year. This will help many back into work and escape the benefits trap. Basic tax rate stays at 20%. The higher rate should begin at £70,000. Cut energy taxes and beat the cost of living crisis. Save households over £500 per year. Scrap VAT on energy bills. Lower fuel duty by 20p per litre. Scrap environmental levies. Cut residential stamp duty. Substantially boost economic activity in house building by cutting stamp duty to 0% below 750k, 2% from 750 to 1.5 million, and 4% over £1.5 million. Abolish the VAT tourist tax. The government has cost our economy over £10 billion when they stopped the VAT refund scheme for tourists shopping. This also deterred up to 2 million tourists. Abolish the grief tax, inheritance tax for all estates under £2 million. That means 98% of all estates. The rate above £2 million will be 20% tax with the option to donate to charity instead. Oh, that seems nice. Free over 1.2 million small and medium-sized businesses from corporation tax. Lift the minimum profit threshold to 100k. Reduce the main corporation tax rate from 25% to 20%, then to 15% from year 5. Abolish IR35 rules to support sole traders. Britain's self-employed often work longer hours and take more risks. Many have no pension and receive no sick pay. Lift the VAT threshold to 120,000. Free up small entrepreneurs from red tape. I mean, notice how their entire economic policy is just about cutting taxes. Now, the first thing it states was make work pay. And by doing that, they want to increase the personal allowance to £20,000. That's not making work pay. Increasing wages is making work pay. Now, there is nothing in their manifesto about strengthening unions or collective bargaining or increasing the minimum wage. It's just tax cuts across the board. Corporation tax, they want to bring down to 20% and then 15%. I mean, how is this going to be paid for? Now, there is one policy which does sound quite good, which is on infrastructure. Tighter regulation and new ownership model for critical national infrastructure. Consumers have been ripped off and failed by weak regulators. Launch a new model that brings 50% of each utility into public ownership. The other 50% will be owned by UK pension funds, benefiting from new expertise and better management. This is a win-win situation. Now, that is what the role of the state should do, and it's very different from the rest of the manifesto, which is basically a Thatcherite economic model. Sinan, I mean, what do you make of Reform's economic policies?
So yeah, as you say, it is at its core a Thatcherite model. It's deregulation, it's lower taxes, it's basically everything you would expect. It's what you would see from, it's basically what wish fulfillment the right of the Tory party would have. If they got their way, this is what they would want. They just didn't get it. And there's this infrastructure policy. There's this tendency now that is emerging among some European right-wing political parties. You can look at the Polish right-wing political party there, whose name I won't say because I can't say it without swearing. But they, in particular, focused on infrastructure while also doing this lower taxes, deregulation, these sorts of things. So this is actually, oddly, for Nigel Farage, a party led by Nigel Farage, actually kind of a European style of right-wing politics. It's kind of what you would see in Giorgia Meloni as well. This emphasis that critical infrastructure is a big part of the national project. And that's at the core of what it is. And also this ownership model, this new ownership model, while it's sort of, it's appealing to the eye, there is this sort of UK pensions fund aspect of it. That means there's still this profit element to it because, of course, pension funds, they operate on speculative markets and so on. So you do still have what functions as a private ownership. It's just that it's variously actually just various British people and British pension funds that have invested in it. So it is actually very much like the Thatcherite model still in that respect, because Thatcher's big model was having everyone invested into the market as well. So it hasn't strictly departed, but it does have this sort of European nationalist flavor to it that is interesting, but is still to be rejected and to be looked at with caution, I would say.
That's a very good point, actually. And you are right. I mean, we are seeing it across Europe and also slightly, I mean, not in the US, but there is a movement called MAGA communism, which is essentially big supporters of Donald Trump and right-wing social policy. But they believe in, or they say they believe in left-wing economic policies such as public ownership. And I think that you are seeing some right-wing parties adopt some left-wing economic policy. And I think that's broadly to the fact that they know they can't simply just run on the same platform as what traditional Conservative parties are doing. I mean, they do first of all need to set themselves apart from the Tories in the British context, although largely it's about attacking them from the right. But I think they would have less credibility if they came in and said, we're going to do the same thing. And I think when it's not really spending much in this manifesto, but it is a fiscal expansion. When they promise certain things like public ownership, I think it does bring people on side and drags them away, and or maybe a transition from, I don't know, social democracy to really right-wing politics. But you picked up on a really good point there. We are seeing that among right-wing parties. Doesn't mean they're going to do it, though. I mean, I don't trust Nigel Farage as far as I can throw him.
It very much depends. It depends on how on how much they fear their electorates traditionally. So, like when you've seen right-wing parties in Europe come to power, there's an anecdote I'll tell about when I was in Turkey. I was talking to someone there, and the AKP is the government, is the governing party there, right-wing religious political party. But they invest in infrastructure. But they also steal a bunch of money, right? They're corrupt. Everyone knows they're corrupt. Everyone is aware of it. And now I'm not making a specific accusation about any Reform politician, but given the characters they have running, I would not be surprised if there was a lot of corruption if they were in government. But I asked this guy, so why do you still vote for them? You know they steal. And they go at me, look, they steal, but they build roads, right? There's this model of now corrupt conservative politics that kind of emerged in the late, just sort of in the wake of the financial crash in 2008. There is this model of politics that's emerged that is also, oddly, again, for Farage's kind of sort of Eastern European, Southern European sort of style of doing conservative politics. And I think it does have actually some traction in the UK. Because as you say, if you say to British people, would you like things brought into public ownership? Broadly, they will say yes. And they're not going to look too closely at 50% of it's the pension fund, right? Who cares? It's in public ownership. It's going to be managed better. You're not going to have as much sewage pouring into the rivers, presumably. I don't know. We'll have to ask them at some point. But yeah.
I mean, this poses a big problem for the Labour Party because obviously they have completely abandoned any semblance of social democracy. They don't want any spending in their. I mean, we see the manifesto, and I think you kind of illustrated or highlighted sentiment there, which is that, well, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of the socially right-wing policies of maybe reform, but they're at least going to spend some money on somewhere, whereas the Labour Party aren't. Now again, I want to be clear here. I mean, the manifesto is. The Reform Manifesto is terrible. The economic policies is fantasy, and they're not going to end neoliberalism. But if you sprinkle policies like that, and then the Labour Party completely abandon their base, completely abandon the role of the state, and they adopt Thatcherite policies, and don't address the material conditions, there's only going to be a win for the right. But we've got a lot to cover, so we are going to move on. We are going to move on to immigration. Now, they pledged smart immigration, which can target the essential skills our economy needs, such as doctors, nurses, and successful business people earning above the average salary. Stop the boats with our 6-point plan. Recognise a national security threat. Leave the European Convention on Human Rights. 0 illegal immigrants be resettled in the UK. Offshore processing for illegal arrivals. New Department of Immigration. Pick up migrants out of boats and take back to France. We are legally allowed to do this under international treaties. I love that they put that in brackets there. Secure detention for all asylum seekers. Asylum claims that arrive through safe countries will be processed rapidly offshore in British overseas territories. This will stop the scandal of undocumented asylum seekers absconding to work illegally or commit crime. Immediate deportation for foreign criminals. Deport foreign nationals immediately after the prison sentence ends. Withdraw citizenship from immigrants who commit significant crime. Restrict student dependents. Introduce new visa rules for international students and their dependents. Only international students with essential skills can remain in the UK when their study ends. Close down fake courses and abusive immigration schemes. Stop the illegal working scandal. Local wages have been slashed because of cheap, undocumented illegal labour that undermines British workers. The pro-immigration establishment has not enforced the rules. Significant penalties will be imposed on companies and directors that breach these rules. On the NHS, transform doctor and nurse availability. All frontline NHS and social care staff to pay 0 basic rate for 3 years. This will help retain existing staff and attract back many who have recently left. We want the best staff with patients, not in offices, behind desks or retired. Use independent healthcare capacity. Cut waiting lists by using UK and overseas providers. The vast majority do not mind who delivers the cure. We just want the pain gone. The independent sector includes many not-for-profit health providers that provide some of the best care. Organisations such as Nuffield Health and Marie Curie, which provides end-of-life cancer care, are charities. We want to encourage more of these organisations to end the NHS. Tax relief of 20% on all private healthcare and insurance. We will incentivise people who can afford to pay more. This will improve care for all as pressure on the NHS is significantly reduced. Those who rely on the NHS will enjoy faster, better care. Independent healthcare capacity will grow rapidly, providing competition and reducing costs. Firms should be encouraged to offer staff health insurance. This will become standard. Labour will instead add VAT on independent healthcare, which will make the NHS worse off. Doctor and nurse training. End training caps for all UK medical students. Write off student fees pro rata per year over 10 years of NHS service for all doctors, nurses and medical staff. Cut waste, bureaucracy and unnecessary managers. Focus on results, not targets. Nail down better prices using economies of scale. Better IT, for example. Review all PFI contracts in NHS. Significant savings potential. Remove lifetime cap on NHS pensions. This causes 70% of surgeons to reduce their hours. Save A&E. GP waiting lists are hitting A&E. Cut waiting times with a campaign of pharmacy first, GP second, A&E last. More beds in A&E and other parts of the NHS are essential. Then we move on to housing. Review the planning system, fast-track planning and tax incentives for development of brownfield sites, including unused offices and vacant high street properties. Review system of Section 106 developer contributions for infrastructure such as schools and surgeries to accelerate house building. Reform social housing law. Prioritise local people and those who are paid into the system. In parts of the UK, almost half of all social housing is occupied by someone born overseas. Foreign nationals must go back of the queue, not the front. Scrap the 2019 tax changes for landlords. The tax system should encourage smaller landlords into the rental markets, not penalise them. Abolish the Renters Reform Bill. Existing legislation was adequate to address bad practices. Instead, we will boost the monitoring, appeals and enforcement process. So the policy on immigration isn't surprising, although there is nothing about the lack of people to fill the vacancies in the NHS, which we have to rely on immigration at the moment. I mean, there's nothing about training up nurses and doctors apart from tax relief. Again, it's just more tax cuts. And even campaigning on people's behaviour. Pharmacy first, GP second, AE last. Because, of course, the NHS is at breaking point because too many people are going to A&E for a cough, and nothing to do with the systemic mismanagement and austerity. Now, their housing policy, I mean, nothing about building more houses. They want to scrap the Renters Reform Bill because existing legislation is adequate. I mean, I think someone should tell Reform about those who have died due to mould in rented accommodation. Now, their climate policy, they want to scrap net zero and scrap annual 10 billion of renewable energy subsidies. Finally, one of their policies, which is outright vote rigging. Commence reform of the postal voting system. Postal voting has allowed electoral fraud. We will stop postal voting except for the elderly, disabled, or those who can't leave their homes. I mean, first of all, there's no evidence that postal votes has been used for fraud. The total amount of fraud in the last election was literally less than 10 cases. Voting fraud is not a thing. However, they don't want to ban it. They are saying that those who are disabled, elderly, or those who can't leave their homes can use it. I mean, that is rigging the vote. Especially older voters are more likely to vote Reform. You can't give access to certain people for postal voting. That's mad, and I don't think that's legal. Sinan, I mean, we covered a lot there.
Yeah.
What do you make of Reform's NHS, immigration, housing, and climate policy?
Right, I'll take it one at a time. So NHS, it's nonsense. It's not going to work. None of that's going to work. I think Farage constantly talks about adopting a French model for the NHS, which is basically just a social insurance system. Definitely opening the door for privatization. You can see it in sort of these are private organizations, these charities. It actually reminds me of a lot of the healthcare systems that you would see in the 19th century and early 20th century, which were just charity-based healthcare systems, which is, was it better than nothing? Sure. Is it gonna work in 2024 as a model of healthcare provision en masse? Probably not. If you look at immigration, it's exactly what you expect. A lot of that stuff they mentioned in immigration is not. It doesn't work with our international obligations. The bit where they said this is legal, we can definitely do it, feels like the lawyer has gone, this is ... legal. That feels like what's happened there, because it's almost certainly not legal. There's actually almost certainly no way that's actually legal. So that will be really interesting to see how that plays out. Housing, look, they say the existing regulations were inadequate. Under the current regulations, last year you had 48% of private renters living in a house with some disrepair issue. That's not that doesn't seem like a system that's particularly adequate. Like a disrepair issue could be you don't have hot water, for example. Like how is that adequate? And obviously everything is fantasy nonsense. They can't. None of this is what they say it is. None of it is legal. None of the immigration stuff is legal. In essence, they can try and Palpatine it and be like, "I'll make it legal," all they want. But there's definitely going to be some clash coming with an international court, and it'll be interesting to see if they would drive the UK into being a pariah state. I mean, more so than we already are, and that we deserve to be, really.
I do love their brackets. It's like,
yeah, it's incredible.
By the way, it is legal. It's like, okay. I mean,
it's the kind of thing I'd put in a video as a joke, right? This is definitely legal. Just to be clear, I did not break any laws making this video. I promise.
But Reform want to say we're the party of workers. That's what they claim. But if you look at the manifesto, right, okay, fine, they're strict on immigration. That appeals to some people. Appeals to middle-class people probably more than working-class people, by the way. But I digress. But if we look at policies that help workers, it's not in there. So as I said, there's nothing about trade unions, nothing about collective bargaining, nothing about wages. The only thing they say about pay is cutting taxes. Now, if you ask me, right, I mean, we pay around 20% income tax. If they turn around and said, we're going to cut your income taxes by 5%, I say, okay, that's good. That helps me. However, to pay for it, we're going to cut our public services. Well, that actually makes us worse off. Now, the very richest in society, they don't need to necessarily rely on public services. They can go private everywhere. That doesn't affect them. But for us who rely on this stuff every single day, like the NHS, that affects us. So in a way, it makes us poorer materially. It might not look it because, you technically have higher number in your wage packet. You have more money. But wealth isn't just income. Wealth is what we experience as a society. Wealth is how good our transport is. If our transport is failing, like public, like buses, right, that actually makes it harder to get to work and it causes problems down the line. These things that are lost on so many people, and it doesn't address it in the Reform Manifesto. And also when it comes to renters, well, look, at the end of the day, landlords have more power over renters, but they're talking about, well, actually, the existing legislation is fine. And you brought up a very, very worrying statistic. 48% of people, renters, have issues in their housing because landlords aren't doing anything about it. That's because legislation isn't strong enough. Now, those were the big policies of Reform. Of course, there are a lot more, and people might be saying, well, why haven't you covered X and Y? But again, we only have a certain amount of time to cover this. I mean, last show we did the Green Party, the Labour Party, and the Tories all in one. So it's very difficult to try and get this out to people. But I believe it's the ones that are the most relevant to people's material conditions. But obviously, if you do want to go read the manifesto, you can go on their website and check it out and judge for yourself. But we will be moving on to our next story. Candidates across the country have been pulling out of Hustings in order to, it seems like, avoid scrutiny. The latest candidate to do so was Labour's Praful Nagand, who is running to unseat Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North. Now, Jeremy has responded to the news with a statement. I'm dismayed that Islington North's healthcare hustings have been cancelled following Labour's refusal to participate. Hustings are crucial to local democracy and are an opportunity to engage with people we are meant to represent. Residents in Islington North deserve to know who their candidates are. They deserve to know what they are voting for, and they deserve to know their plans for the NHS. Over the weekend, I joined healthcare workers and campaigners at an emergency rally to defend our local health services. We believe in fully funded, fully public healthcare, and we will not allow private interests to carve up the NHS for profits. If other candidates do not agree, then they should at least give residents the respect they deserve by being transparent about their views and intentions. I am not afraid of questions. I am not afraid of discussion. I am not afraid of scrutiny. Why is the Labour candidate? I'm proud to have spent my life campaigning with my community for universal healthcare. This is what I will continue to do. It's no surprise that Nagand pulled out of the hustings since the topic of debate was around healthcare. Now, Nagand has multiple IVF clinics, so he profits off privatised healthcare. Now, a recent video surfaced where he said privatisation of healthcare is important. We covered it on our last show. And one of his clinics may have been selling useless and potentially harmful services to patients. But it isn't just this constituency. This is happening all over. Sinan, democratic accountability. I mean, that seems like a good idea, but apparently not a good thing according to MPs or prospective candidates.
No, they definitely don't like being held accountable. So there's kind of a couple of things happening here. One is the very specific thing in Islington North, where they have put up a candidate that is apparently unable to see the massive opportunity they have to be like the centrist hero for all time. Won't even face Jeremy Corbyn in a hustings, which I think is just reflective of how just how poor the bench was for them for picking a candidate to run against him. Because either him or Paul Mason, right? Those were your two choices. There's another broader thing though, which is MPs have reacted very poorly in general to particularly social media, right? We've seen a lot of things come up in Parliament in the past two parliaments, really, where a big topic of conversation has been safety online. How do we stop abuse online? How do we stop this? And a lot of that does stem from this conflation of a certain type of person saying, you're awful at your job. And to be clear, most MPs are not very good at their job. They're not very good at the job of being an MP. And so someone telling them that feels a little bit like, maybe a little bit threatening to their security. Maybe not their actual security, but to their job security, certainly. And so you have got this tendency of just a rejection of popular participation. And especially if you look in the context of like the way the Labour right behaved from 2015 onwards, it is all this backlash. You have to understand it in the context of this broader backlash against public participation. That's really because they find it threatening. They do find it threatening when people actually participate because they are not good representatives. And you can see that in party manifestos, right? There's nothing between the Tories, between Reform, between Labour. There is nothing that people really actually want except for like a couple of crumbs across all of them. So yeah, I would be afraid too of democratic accountability if I was so out of step with British public opinion. That would worry me too.
Well, what we've seen in the last couple of years is essentially conflating abuse with accountability. And we've seen how thin-skinned some of our MPs are, particularly Labour MPs, where you say something on Twitter like, you're rubbish, you suck. And they're like, I've been dogpiled by some lefty and they're threatening my safety. Whilst at the same time, not saying anything about Diane Abbott or other people who actually receive abuse. Now, I'm not saying that these MPs who, cry wolf have never received abuse. They probably do, because some people, a lot of people are angry and some people do go a bit far. But generally, I mean, I've seen, Twitter is great, right? It's the internet. It's a public forum. We can see what this so-called abuse is. And some of them have genuinely been, you're shit at your job. I mean, it definitely hurts their feelings, I guess. But their job is to serve the public. That is actually part of the job. I know when people say like, well, celebrities, and they're like, oh, I felt a lot of abuse, or I've had a lot of abuse, and people say, well, that comes with fame. I would say, well, actually, just being famous doesn't mean it warrants criticism or attacks at least. But actually, being an MP, it is part of the job. You're there to represent the people, aren't you?
Yeah, it's this thing where they think the only reasonable way to engage democratically is the ballot box, right? They think, because you always hear this, like the only place where MPs should feel threatened is at the ballot box. But they also clearly don't feel threatened there either, because they're not changing any of their politics to match their constituents. I mean, if you take, for example, Gaza, right? Most of the British public throughout the entire thing wanted an immediate ceasefire. It took 8 months before major political parties even moved an inch on that, before they even moved slightly in the direction of where the center of British public opinion was. So they clearly don't feel threatened by the ballot box either, which might be why you see independent candidates pop up and just say, hey, these guys supported genocide in Gaza. That might be why this keeps happening to them, and might keep happening as well. You'll probably see more and more energized independents as time goes on, I would think.
Yeah, that's a good point you made. They're not even threatened by the ballot box, because I think in this particular election, because look, we have seen over the last couple of years MPs saying they don't, we're getting abuse, and that's to avoid scrutiny. But what Praful was doing the Labour candidate pulling out of Hustings. He's not the only one. It is genuinely happening across the country. I've seen in the last couple of days at least 5, 6 examples where politicians are pulled out and the Hustings have been cancelled. And that is because there is no threat at the ballot box, because Labour are on course to win a huge majority and we know who's going to win. So that's actually probably partly fueling this, because they think, well, actually, I don't need to try and win your vote because I'm in a safe red seat and we're going to win.
Yeah, like this is part of it, and this is why when you see electoral calculus, I think it was Birmingham Ladywood, they had this projection out with Labour won 79% there at the last election. You know, there's no way anyone, now there's an independent there who's projected to get like 37, 38% of the vote, something in that region. And it's like, yeah, this is what happens. If it's the same thing that happened in Scotland, right? They keep asking the question, where are you going to go, to people? And my general answer to that is it's never obvious until it is. Like, it didn't have to be the SNP in Scotland, ended up being them, right? Doesn't have to be left-wing independence. It doesn't have to be, you know, Galloway's outfit or Reform or whoever is thinking it, but it will be obvious as soon as it happens, because they're really tempting fate. I think they're tempting fate by not engaging in hustings generally, or just engaging at all. They just seem to have switched off and decided they can cruise. And, you know, hate to quote Rishi Sunak positively, but I do think the British people don't like being taken for granted. I do think that is something that can and will bite them in some surprising ways.
I agree with everything you said there. Now, before we move on, let's go to some of our comments. Jacqueline Jack, welcome back. Has anyone heard about that joke independent candidate who was campaigning in 11 different constituencies? Rishi Sunak's, Richard Burgon's, and Zara Sultana's being 3 of them. I haven't heard about that. I don't know, Sinan, if you have, or if anyone in the chat wants to drop a comment, but I
think I know who it is. I think
do?
It's Nico Omalana, the YouTuber who ran for London Mayor and beat Brian Rose. Famously, Brian Rose. Unfortunately, Brian Rose's YouTube channel, my favorite YouTube channel. Sorry to reveal that on stream. Is gone now, but it was incredible. I can't mention my favorite video. I think it will get us nuked quite thoroughly from YouTube. But it's Nico Omalana, the YouTuber. I think they're not clear if it's like people who changed their name to his name running, or if he's just decided to run in like 11 places, which he can't do.
So I'm aware of the story. Yeah, I think some may have changed their name, but apparently, our producer's saying that he's under police investigation, as it's not legal to stand in multiple constituencies. I mean, yeah, it could be him standing multiple. I don't know if he'd take the risk. I mean, he's quite a high-profile guy. Maybe it's just people using his name.
It
Very
must
funny.
be people. Like there's no way you go to jail for electoral fraud or for content purposes. What are you doing?
I feel like we need a bit of spice in this election, because this is the most boring general election in my entire life. Yeah. People a lot older than me would say the same thing. You know, keep the gaffes coming.
Yeah,
keep the gaffes coming.
You know what? I should have run in Ashfield. I was joking about doing it. I should have done it. I'm just down the road. I could have done it.
Start up a Hustings with you and God, what's that Pratt's name?
Is it
Anderson,
Lee Anderson? Yeah, Lee Anderson. Yeah.
Edward Sexby, good to see you again. I'm going to start saying this reform manifesto is nothing more than a classic fascist program, populist language, but actually just massively pro-capitalist, racist, anti-working class. I mean, that is the modus operandi of the right. But actually, to borrow a phrase from No Justice, Nigel Farage and Reform are fake populists. They use that language of populism. I mean, one of the Reform YouTube videos says on a thumbnail, take on the establishment. They try and pit up establishment policies and then say, this is anti-establishment, like tax cuts, right? I mean, neoliberalism, the last 40 years we've had weakening unions, privatization, and tax cuts for the rich. They'll say that is establishment, or anti-establishment, which is not. UV power. When you go further to the right, you find less neoliberalism, because by default, the far right are nationalists as opposed to neoliberal globalists, e.g. taxing firms that hire cheap overseas labour. I mean, yeah, I think that kind of addresses what you were saying earlier, Sinan, about the European right. I mean, they're happy to maybe spend a bit of money on things. It's kind of like the, we'll make sure, as long as the trains are on time, even though the trains weren't on time at Pinocchio.
No, famously not, no.
Famously not.
No.
Pinochet even. But yeah, I think it is a tactic from the right. Abodi, everywhere I look, every time I turn the radio on, every time I look at the BBC, wherever it is, I see or hear either Reform or Farage. Yes, you do, and that has been happening for a long, long time. There's a reason why Reform, aka UKIP, aka the Brexit Party, has shot up in the polls, and they seem to gain this popularity, whereas the Green Party has existed since the 70s. Or the 80s, hasn't seen that growth, is because of the media, and specifically the BBC. I mean, everyone said, or some people say, well, the BBC is so left-wing. I mean, they've quite literally created Nigel Farage's career. They created Lawrence Fox's career, actually, his grift to the right. So no. This is definitely manufactured consent here. Now, another question, comment, Jacqueline Jack H again. Not that I want the Labour candidate for Islington North to win, but he can't be that serious about winning if he's got Margaret Hodge and Peter Mandelson campaigning for him. Sinan, I know you want to say something about that.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so I first of all, the Peter Mandelson thing. Everyone's going to ask him about Epstein. It's the first thing anyone would ask. Someone has done a very, very long YouTube video because they are a fool that maybe includes a photograph of Peter Mandelson and Epstein. So won't name names yet. But the funnier thing is Margaret Hodge, because Margaret Hodge has been mad at Jeremy Corbyn since like the 70s or 80s. Like I think it might be the 90s where he just constantly foiled all of her weird schemes when she was on Islington Council and owned her in a public debate, and she just got super mad about it. It's just incredible how long some of these people hold a grudge for. It's just, and these are unpleasant people. You have to have like a bit of charm, right, on the doorstep. You know, Jeremy Corbyn's got a little bit, you know, at least, whatever else you think about it. But these people are just deeply unpleasant.
It's like speaking to Owen Jones again. So I spoke to him last 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the Labour right specifically. And Owen Jones worked in the mainstream media. He's rubbed shoulders with some of these guys, and he's like, these are horrible, horrible people, nasty people, and bitter. And I think you're right with Margaret Hodge. She's clearly still pissed off about 30 years ago. That she's bitter about it. And a lot of the people who hated Jeremy Corbyn so much is because he held a mirror up to them. And I think it's hurt their personal standing. Stanley Beckett, how Mandelson is allowed out in public beats me. I suppose he is a useful weapon for Uncle Rupert. It's also, I mean, you talk about Rupert Murdoch because he does own Talk TV, doesn't he? And Mandelson was on Talk TV or Talk Radio talking about how I'm going to go down to Islington North and make sure that I stop Jeremy Corbyn's campaign. And Matt Chorley was the interviewer. Matt Chorley and other people on the media do not question Mandelson's strange friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, there was pictures of him celebrating his birthday party. I mean, I feel like a rigorous media that holds people to account would ask about that, wouldn't they? But
yeah, I mean,
seems like they don't care. Now, Turn Left is a voluntary endeavour. We have multiple people working on these shows, working hard in their spare time to bring this content to you. We've got people in the background, a lovely producer who's doing all these amazing graphics and all these camera switching, all this sort of gizmo stuff, high-tech stuff. Slightly sarcasm, but he's doing a great job. Now, we would really appreciate if you were to subscribe to our channel. If you haven't already, make sure you share our content, and if you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month. The goal is to become a fully funded media organisation where people can dedicate their time to Turn Left with a wage. Now, let's get on to our next story. Hope Not Hate have come out with a blistering attack on George Galloway's Workers' Party. This is Nick Lowles from the campaign sharing an image of an anti-Galloway leaflet. 5 Hope Not Hate teams out in Rochdale today. Some still ploughing on despite the rain. Now on to our second leaflet in some areas. Fantastic reception on doorstep. Obviously you can see an image of an anti-Galloway leaflets. Now this has also prompted a response from Galloway saying he will be seeking legal action. Stand by for the legal, financial and political destruction of the ironically entitled Hope Not Hate and strategic damage to their shared campaign with Rochdale Labour to get Labour in. Now, the Workers' Party does have issues with racism. Some of the candidates have shared some pretty bad tweets. George Galloway himself has recently said some very controversial homophobic things, namely on Novara Media. However, Hope Not Hate's selective outrage is pretty striking. They've gone after Reform, Workers' Party, and Tommy Robinson. Okay, fine. But nothing when it comes to the Labour rights. Hope Not Hate haven't said a single thing about Luke Akehurst and the awful remarks he's made. It's clear Hope Not Hate isn't a genuine anti-fascist and anti-racist organisation, but essentially a centrist organisation where its sympathies and maybe loyalties lie with the Labour rights. Sinan, would you agree with that assessment?
So there's like a couple of things here, right? So the first thing is partisan loyalty to Labour right. I think it's more a loyalty to what the mainstream is, because there's this sort of view of extremism and racism where what is extremism and racism? It's the things that the extremists and racists say, which means that it's everyone outside the mainstream that is easy to sort of describe in this way. And this is just not a good way of understanding racism. And also there's this other thing, which is for a long time, Hope Not Hate didn't really speak about racism in the Conservative Party. There was a long time where they didn't mention these things. Now, there was some open secrets open on social media. You can go look them up about certain Conservative MPs who like to perhaps hang out with certain far-right organizations. Now, that's completely outrageous. They shouldn't, in a normal liberal democratic, like a functioning liberal democratic society, you would have organizations like this criticize it. But this is the problem. You can't NGOify anti-racism. This is the main issue here. You can't have big institutions that then tackle racism or any kind of bigotry as sort of an individual problem, because that's not how these things actually work, right? It's not about identifying the racists or the general bigots and then moving them away, because eventually another bigot will appear because you've not dealt with the actual problem, right? And it just betrays a very sort of typically British kind of Middle English, kind of like Middle Englander understanding of what racism is. It's when the bad guy says the bad thing, but it's actually a systemic problem. And they're just not invested in it in that way, which is why it manifests. It looks like it's this sort of partisan loyalty to Labour, but it's really just that they have the same institutional understanding of what racism is and bigotry in general.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because you basically said essentially the loyalty of organisations like Hope Not Hate is the mainstream. And let's be honest, the Labour right are very much, when we say mainstream, not mainstream political opinion, but what the establishment thinks. And essentially the lens in which Hope Not Hate view their anti-racism is, we hate the radical left and we hate the radical right. The centre is perfect. But they've got their blinkers on. They're searching for what they can see bigotry and racism, which is, in your face stuff. Can't seem to understand everyday racism. Can't seem to understand systemic racism, things like that. And I think you do a disservice to anti-racism when you pull up someone like George Galloway. Again, his Workers' Party candidates have said some pretty bad stuff, right? But to say nothing about Luke Akehurst, who said that Jews were politically black, who supported the colonization of Palestinian land, and a plethora of other things. And Luke Akehurst isn't the only candidate there. What about Change UK and Angela White? Funny tinge, calling brown people a funny tinge. These are the sort of people that Hope Not Hate hang around with, the Eddie Marsdens of the world. It's a load of bullshit, if you ask me.
Yeah, definitely. Like these are not organizations that are equipped to deal with it seriously, and part of that's because they're not really meant to, right? They're made. If you look at the sort of circles of the Labour right, like you said, these people hang out with each other. Basically, if you look at the circles of these people, they overlap. There's often a revolving door and stuff, right? This does exist. And so this sort of NGOification of like how we understand racism and bigotry is just prevalent across the mainstream, such that it is, again, detached from public opinion, but, solidly within the two main parties. And that's why this happens, because you go looking for it somewhere else, right? If you're friends with someone and you're looking for something that's gone wrong, you don't go looking to your friend as the one who messed it up, right? You'll go looking somewhere else because you don't want to believe that your friend is like that, right? You don't want to believe it. but they might be like that. If your friend's Luke Akehurst, there's a solid chance that your friend
who's
is
friends
just
with Luke
like that.
Akehurst? I'll have to ask that question. But
Well, Luke Akehurst is married, so there's someone for everyone out there. Don't worry about it.
There truly is.
Yeah, look, she also apparently said that pro-Palestine protesters belong in Iran. There truly is somewhere out there for everyone, for real. Don't worry, everyone. You relax. There's someone out there for you. I promise.
Now we actually have some more comments coming. This is a very lively chat again, so we're going to read some out. Edward Sexby again. Hope Not Hate are the successor organisation to Searchlight. Ruth Smith was big up in them. They always were ready to sell out genuine anti-fascists to the states whilst protecting certain others. And that's a good point, because Sinan and Edward, you kind of hit the nail on the head in the entire political media circle jerk, actually, I'll say, which is that they're all friends, right? The Labour right, the media figures, some in the Tory party, they're all mates. Half of them meet up at what's that bar in Parliament called?
The Strangers Bar. The Strangers Bar. Yeah, there it is.
But they're certainly not strangers. And that's exactly how you get bad outcomes, because of, like I said, Hope Not Hate say, well, we care about anti-racism, but we don't want to throw our mates under the bus. Well, tough. You're not an anti-racist organisation. Norwich Guitar. Phil S. Norwich Guitar. The Tories are allowed to be racist. It's built in, just like the Empire being all about teaching cricket and helping the underdevelopment build trains. Sinan, you want to say something again?
Look, I'm just going to say, if you ever want to look at the trains thing, look at the Belgian Congo map for the trains they built, and you'll understand what those trains were for. That's all I'm going to say about that. Also, I like the guitar in the picture. I just wanted to throw that in. It looked real cool.
Okay, let's move on to our final story of the evening. Keir Starmer continues his purge of dissidents inside the Labour Party, despite being halfway through an election. Lord Michael Cashman has had the whip removed. His crime, because he called a Labour MP lazy. Breaking: Labour has removed the party whip from Lord Michael Cashman after he appeared to suggest that Rosie Duffield, Labour candidate for Canterbury, was too frit or lazy to attend a hustings. Cashman has been a Labour legislator since 1999, MEP until 2014, now a Lords. On Friday, in a statement on social media, she said her attendance at local hustings in the run-up to the 4th of July general election was impossible because of constant trolling. Lord Cashman replied under the post, "Frit or lazy." The Stonewall co-founder later apologised for the comment. Now, it's worth noting that Rosie Duffield is an extremely transphobic MP. I mean, she liked a tweet by Graham Linehan engaging in essentially soft Holocaust denial. Now, a lot of criticisms of Rosie Duffield have been her, frankly, bigoted views. Now, I'm not going to say she's never received abuse ever, but Cashman was the co-founder of Stonewall, which is the largest LGBTQ organisation in Europe. Now, many MPs, including Diane Abbott, have received the most disgusting abuse, yet they haven't shied away from debate or hustings. My assessment is that it's very plausible Duffield doesn't want to be held to account on her views. But the anger from Cashman is justifiable. I mean, he did apologise for his comments, which the comments themselves were absolutely non-controversial. But I guess it was because it was written under a tweet by Duffield saying, well, she's received abuse. But again, as I explained, a lot of that may have been simple criticisms. And to remove the whip from Cashman, again, co-founder of Stonewall, has been in the Labour Party for decades. Removing the whip is grotesque. Now, I caught up with James Schneider talking about how, despite many on the Labour right and the media calling Corbyn's leadership a clique, cult-like and Stalin-esque, the truth is that's the way the Labour right and how Keir Starmer operates. A lot of the accusations thrown at Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader, it's a far-left cult, it's a clique. He's his leadership style was like Stalin purging everybody, but it seems like we know for a fact that every accusation seems to be a confession.
Yes.
Because actually, under Jeremy Corbyn, you had a membership that swelled up to 600,000. You had, I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes of the leadership at the time was not implementing open selection, but you could see there was a democratic drive under Jeremy Corbyn. Now we're seeing purges left, right, and centre. And when I say left, right, and centre, just the left, you're seeing a clampdown of us. I mean, it's like a Stalinist-style leadership from Keir Starmer, and he only wants to fill the party with corporate lobbyists and anyone who's from trade unions or who stands on picket lines are not welcome. So I think actually all the accusations of Jeremy Corbyn is true now, isn't it?
Yes, I love that expression, every accusation is a confession, because I think in so many cases it's true. I mean, the cult thing is so funny. The Labour manifesto, this Labour manifesto, it's seen even sort of centrist commentators chuckling about Keir Jong-un, where there are 60 photos, I think, of the dear leader across the pages of this manifesto. I mean, Jeremy couldn't possibly allow such a thing. I mean, he knows it isn't about him. And yes, of course, I was Jeremy's comms person. I dealt with the media for him when he was leader. We're endlessly dealing with accusations of being Stalinist when what's happened is some members have decided that they wish to challenge the person that they have elected, which seems to be the most ordinary democratic thing possible. Whereas now you have newspaper columnists sort of urging Keir, come on, purge and prohibit. But we should find this instructive and clarifying rather than infuriating and depressing. This is how power operates. This is what we have to learn about so that we can defeat it. We shouldn't take them at their word when they say, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, he's a horrible this, that, or the other. They're playing their position. The role is to act as a firebreak against the democratic demands of the people. And again, it's not really about Jeremy Corbyn. They're that worried about, or whoever came before or whoever comes after. What they're worried about is that the people of this country will realise that actually our rulers don't have a grip and they can't control us if we decide that we're not going to be controlled by them. And that means that we can have a much more equal and enjoyable distribution of the resources that we have in our society. And we can put our basic values, human values, the idea that we wish to humanize the world, into practice in the laws of the land, how we run the economy, how we run our society, and how we run our relations with the rest of the world.
Now, you can watch the entire interview with James Schneider this Sunday. Sinan, in that clip, James says that the draconian top-down style of Keir Starmer is more than just about getting a grip on the party, but it's actually wider than that. It's about power, solidifying power over the democratic will of the party. Also, obviously, I want to ask you, what do you make of Lord Cashman, LGBTQ rights activist, who's had the whip removed for a tweet? Cashman isn't exactly on the left. He quit the party in 2016 over Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, so just firstly, the thing that he said in that tweet, I'm going to start with the tweet, completely accurate. Like, there's numerous public accounts of Rosie Duffield just not really seeming to want to do the job of being an MP, being difficult to get a hold of. There's lots of public accounts of it. You can go find those. And I suppose for Rosie Duffield, it's quite a taxing trip to take the train from North Wales down to Canterbury. It would take quite a long time, partially because of the politics that she is supporting in the Labour manifesto. It will take even longer, I imagine. But yeah, the other part of this is that clip. You have to understand the Labour Party as sort of an arm of the British state in a lot of ways. And trying to take that arm from the British state prompted an incredible reaction. Like, I think if you look at the general conduct, just to take an example, if you look at the leaked report about the conduct of Labour Party staff, that raises serious questions about how democratic the UK is. And that is, again, as James said, it's how power operates. They are playing their position. They were in a position where they could do this, so they did. And you have to understand the Labour Party in that way. And look, and part of it is, once you have a sledgehammer, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that's what they've done here. They've decided to they've gone mad with it. They've gone mad with power before they have actual power. It's incredible just to see how they conduct themselves when they think they're winning. They're acting like they've already won, and it's going to be a dangerous game to play in the long run, just because people will get fed up with them eventually, and I don't think they'll find any affection for them once they're out of government, for sure.
And as I mentioned earlier, Cashman isn't on the left. He quits the party under Jeremy Corbyn. He's not a big lefty. And I think this is the natural progression of authoritarianism, right? I mean, it's how it's always spread. It starts off with your enemies and no one cares because they're your enemies too. And they go a bit further and further, and then you start to catch people that, hold on a sec, I kind of agree with them. So I think, but what strikes me is this is happening before Keir Starmer's in power.
Yeah.
So it's a major issue here, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you look at the sort of political science on how fascism operates, right? Fascist regimes that existed for a long time, unfortunately, there were some, they narrowed who was in the in-group as time went on, because it's an ideology that requires constant conflict, constant othering. So it's a lot like if the American, MAGA communists or whoever, they got what they wanted, all the Mexicans are in Mexico, they would go to Mexico after that because they need that conflict. In a lot of ways, because sort of the broad ideology that Keir Starmer represents is this kind of center-right, sort of capitalist, kind of occasionally social liberal way of thinking. They think in the same way. They think in hierarchy, right? And so they're incredibly vulnerable to falling into this cycle. I'm not saying they are fascists. I'm saying they're vulnerable to thinking like that. And this is how that manifests over the long form. The incredible thing is they've done it quicker than the fascists do. They've done it in negative time. It's actually incredible that they've done it. So in a way, it's a testament to Keir Starmer's efficiency and ability to change the things that need changing in organizations. And that was the change he brought about. So well done, Keir Starmer, I guess. He's found a more efficient way to get into this cycle than the fascists did. So well done.
But the only thing you can congratulate Starmer on, I think, because there's not much else you can. We do actually have some more comments if we're going to go to those right now. Troy Mason, you have to tell me in the comments how you say it. The fact that the Labour Party with Starmer at the helm is our, real choice is really depressing for the political situation in the UK. Yeah, I mean, I used to say, I'm going to have a 5 minutes of sort of bliss when the Tories lose the election, because it's finally the Tories are gone. And as we get closer to the election, I don't think I'm even going to have that 5 minutes of bliss, because I know what's coming. So definitely depressing. Fancy Wookie, Starmer can literally become the leader of a G7 country and still be insecure about his personal power. You are right about that, because he went on G News to cry about people laughing at him because he said his dad was a toolmaker. Keir Starmer.
He just needs to stop saying it. He just needs to stop saying it for real. Just stop saying it.
They're not laughing at your dad. They're not laughing that you're working class. I mean, most politicians, like yourself, want to appeal to working class people by saying, well, I'm really working class. That's why they're laughing. Okay? You keep on saying your dad's a toolmaker because you're trying to appeal to that. I'm a bloody working class guy. I'm humble. That's what they're laughing at. So yeah, he's an incredibly thin-skinned man. Political, perhaps if she stopped using her platform to promote hatred, people wouldn't be angry with her. That's in reference to Rosa Duffer. Well, exactly. I mean, if you're going to be extremely transphobic, and I do think she's extremely transphobic, you're going to get people point that out. I mean, why do that? It's expected. Becca A, that was such a great interview with Owen. He really went off. Good on him. Yeah, I mean, it was we ended up speaking for about an hour and 20 minutes because he does go. When he speaks, he goes. I mean, we shortened it down because there was a lot of the same sort of discussions. But he's a very impassioned man, especially when we spoke about Gaza. But when we talked about the Labour right, yeah, he seemed quite angry, but justifiably angry. That is all for tonight. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. I'd also like to thank Sinan for joining me tonight as well. Make sure you subscribe to their YouTube channel. You can find it at youtube.com/@SK the Crusader. The link will also be in the description. Now, Sinan also dropped a really, really long and brilliant video uncovering Keir Starmer. It's very detailed, and it's a must watch. You can find that on the channel. Now, we need to remind everyone that the 18th of June, tomorrow at 11:59, is the deadline to register to vote. So if you haven't, you must do it. Deadline to apply for postal and proxy vote is 5 p.m. on the 26th of June. So make sure you go and do that. My name is Curtis Daly. Thank you again. And you can catch us here this Wednesday at the same time of 7:30 p.m. See you then.